J. Elias, General Legal Counsel at Dyer-Lake Funeral Home in North Attleboro. Welcome to this episode of Live and Learn, a series of programs designed to be informative, educational, and upbeat, and always intended to enhance and encourage our personal wellness and awareness. Who are you? It's a simple enough question, but it can be awfully hard to answer. If I ask you to describe yourself in just 3 words, could you do so? It's not really as easy as you may think. 3 words only to sum up how you would describe yourself to others. And think about this. If you were in a group of others who knew you, even just as acquaintances, would they be able to recognize you if they were anonymously told those 3 words? Let's take it one step further. Can you describe yourself using 1 word only? And on the subject of who you are, what would you say is your best characteristic or personality trait? And your worst one? And one more quick question for you to consider. If your biography were to be written at this point in your life, what would the title be? So who are you? And are you the same person you were 10, 20, maybe 50 years ago? There are countless ways to interpret the question of who you are. You might give your name and age, your current or past profession, your role in your family, husband, wife, father, mother, sister, or brother. And if you wanted to take it deeper, you could include a description of your religious or political beliefs and values. We each have different answers to the question because we're all unique. And each answer tells a story about who we are. You can meet thousands of people in your lifetime, but none of them will be exactly the same, and none of them will have the same personality. And so that raises the question of how we can categorize and classify something as widely varied as personality. The concept of personality has been studied for thousands of years. Some say the first theories began with Hippocrates around 370 BC, when he theorized that personality traits and human behaviors are based on separate temperaments associated with what he called the 4 humors, or substances in the body. Many consider it to be one of the first attempts to create the science that would become psychology 2,000 years later. At its core, his theory basically stated that for ideal health, those humors have to be in perfect balance. And when that balance is lost, it leads to sickness. A disability or sickness meant that the humors weren't balanced appropriately, and the way to treat was to regain balance. Moving forward, a physician, Franz Joseph Gall, later developed his own theories on the anatomy and function of the brain in about the 18th century in Vienna, where Sigmund Freud would later foster yet another science of the mind, psychoanalysis, beginning in the late 19th century. But let's talk about Gall. Gall was fascinated by the physical structure of the body while he was a medical student. He believed that measuring the distances between the bumps of the skull and the dents in the skull would reveal the sizes of the brain areas underneath, providing information that could be used to determine whether a person was friendly or kind, violent, and so on. And that science was known as phrenology. To anyone who's ever shaved their head and been horrified by those lumps and dents hidden beneath, the idea that those bumps said anything about their personality and character might seem unsettling. But for a vast number of people around the world, including millions of Americans in the 19th century, phrenology provided comfort and insight, a way to know and understand behavior and personality with seemingly scientific precision. Dr. Gall's initial thoughts came from something he'd observed as a young boy. It seemed that classmates who excelled at memorization tended to have large, protruding eyes, and so he began theorizing about the connection, later suggesting that the part of the brain located behind the eyes must be associated with verbal memory. And Gall conceived of the brain not as a single organ, but as a mosaic of specialized parts that each governed a particular mental or emotional function. The size and development of each area, which Gall called faculties, controlled one's thinking and one's personality. Now think about the origins of the expression, for example, when you say, he has all his mental faculties. Aha! And those faculties included everything from affection and vanity to musical ability. Gall came to believe that the shape of the brain matched the shape of the skull that encased it. So studying those bumps and indentations of the skull could reveal the function and character of the brain beneath, and in turn, the nature of someone's personality and character. In other words, the bumps were an indication of someone's true self. Phrenologists came to believe that people could strengthen their positive brain organs. Just as weightlifting builds muscles, the brain was an organ to be exercised. And that obsession with head size and shape, well, that's had an impact on our country's conversation that's lasted to this day. Some of the expressions we use today trace their roots to phrenology. Think, for example, of the expression highbrow or lowbrow. A high forehead meant intelligence. A low one meant not so much. Ever wonder why it is that you might slap your forehead and say, how stupid of me? That's because intelligence was associated with the forehead area. Or tap the side of your head with your index finger and say, I'm thinking, I'm thinking. That's where the memory regions were thought to be located. Then there's the expression well-rounded, which signified a well-rounded personality because the person's skull was just that, well-rounded. And going to the shrink, well, it seems that because the size and development of each particular area of the skull implied a greater or lesser disposition to each character and attribute, shrinking an undesirable area with treatment can improve those less desired attributes. And here's one. Getting your head examined. That has phrenological roots. Though generally considered an insult today, in the past, it's just what most people wanted. By the 20th century, phrenology had mostly lost its scientific authority and much of its popular appeal. Let's fast forward a few years, and we've come to know that in the world of psychology, learning about personality may be a bit more complicated than reading the bumps in our skull. The American Psychological Association, for example, defines personality as individual differences in characteristic patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. So here's another question for you. Would you say that your behavior is usually consistent with your personality? Would those around you agree with your description of your personality? And would you say that your personality has changed over the years? Would you say that your personality reflects your true inner self? And a couple of more thoughts. Does your personality arise from within you and remain fairly consistent through your lifetime? Or is your personality formed by your social and familial environment? Maybe even your birth order within your family? Some people would say that as long as they can remember, they've had the same personality. For example, have you ever said, I can't help it. It's who I am. I've always been that way. The most well-known personality framework or model is known as the Big Five, a five-factor model of personality. And although this theory of personality applies to people all over the world from a wide assortment of cultures, it's by no means an exhaustive explanation of personality. It's called the Big Five because the five factors are said to encompass a significant portion of personality-related terms. And those five personality traits, well, they can be remembered by the acronym OCEAN. OCEAN, O-C-E-A-N. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Clearly, though, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Each of us can have a bit of this trait or a lot of that trait. Let's take a look at those 5 big personality traits. Openness. Openness may not mean what you think it does. It means open to experiences. Think curious, adventurous, someone who thinks that variety is the spice of life. Those who are not open to experience tend to shy away from new experiences, or even trying new foods or new activities, or even traveling to new places. Conscientiousness refers to being well organized, disciplined, dependable, and goal or achievement oriented and focused. It refers to those who plan rather than act impulsively. Those low in conscientiousness tend to be a bit more carefree and freewheeling. Are you the kind of person who writes the grocery list before you go into the store, or do you go up and down the aisles and pick what looks good at the moment? Impulse buying. Extroversion suggests a more outgoing, social person, a talkative person who tends to be more assertive than not. And on the other end of the spectrum is introversion, which shouldn't be confused with shyness. Those who are introverted aren't necessarily shy, although people often use the terms interchangeably. The main difference between shyness and introversion is whether someone is able to choose to be social without anxiety. Generally, introverts have the ability to choose to be social and interact with others when they want. Shy people, depending on the level of their shyness, often can't make that same choice without a high cost. For them, attending a party can be a real struggle. An introvert, on the other hand, may choose to skip a party, stay home with a good book, not because they're afraid or uncomfortable in socializing, but because they have no interest in dealing with people at the moment. A shy person may actually want to deal with people, but they experience such fear and anxiety they can't bring themselves to go to the party or to some other event. That brings us to A, agreeableness. That measures the extent of a person's warmth and kindness. The more agreeable someone is, the more likely they tend to be trusting, helpful, and compassionate. On the other hand, a disagreeable person is apt to be thought of as cold and suspicious of others, less likely to cooperate. And the N, neuroticism. Those with elevated levels of neuroticism tend to respond less well to environmental stress and tend to interpret ordinary situations as threatening, at times interpreting even minor frustration as hopelessly overwhelming. Neuroticism has also been associated with an array of physical ailments, as well as a disposition to exaggerate their importance. So what makes you you? If you say it's your charming personality, has that changed over the years? Has your sense of humor gone from raucous to witty? Have your spiritual beliefs been tested or compromised over a lifetime? If what makes you you is your appearance, how much has your physical appearance changed over the years, and how has that impacted on how you see you? When you look in the mirror, do you see the same person you saw 20 years ago? Maybe with more lines and creases, or a little bit grayer or less hair. Maybe you're heavier or thinner than you used to be, but still, when you look at yourself in the mirror, do you readily see the same you that you've been seeing all these years? Is it also something inside of you that makes you you, your spirit, your soul, or your mind? Maybe it's your unique perspective on life. Is there only one real you? Undoubtedly, there are different versions of you depending on your circumstances or who you're with at any given moment. Think about it. There may be one you when you're alone and there's no one else around. A you when you're with your immediate family who knows you better than anyone, as opposed to your extended family. A you they know at work. A you in the moments of quiet reflection at church. Or a you when you're socializing with friends. Or is it that together they make up the real you? Would you say that the core of you has changed considerably over your lifetime? Can you relate to the you of your childhood when you were 5, 6, 7 years old? Is the fundamental essence of you at your core the same? maybe just softened or hardened by your life experiences, like a rock worn by the water. If you went to a class reunion years after graduating and you didn't wear a name tag, would the others recognize you from your appearance or the way you speak or maybe the way you walk? Maybe you have the same glint in your eyes or a skewered sense of humor. Is the old you still in there? And you know, when you do look in the mirror and hopefully see yourself, consider the fact that that in and of itself is a remarkable thing. The fact that you recognize yourself in a mirror. Most animals can't actually do it. Elephants can, but when a cat or a dog looks in the mirror, it sees another cat or dog looking back at it. And most humans don't recognize themselves until they're 2 or 3 years old, often even later in life for some in underdeveloped countries, according to several interesting studies. It seems that around the age of 2 or 3, children begin talking out loud in a way that's clearly not intended to communicate to others. They seem to use this self-talk to direct their own behavior. It often starts with one word, mine. Within a few years, they learn to turn that self-talk inward, and from then on, they maintain an internal monologue instead. And we all engage in this inner speech. When we read, we hear our own voice speaking the words. When we work on a problem, sometimes we talk out the steps in our head. And as we go through the day, we make all sorts of comments about the people we meet that we'd never dare and hopefully don't say out loud. This running monologue inside the head, it's a part of who we are and what we would describe as our self. And although when you flip through your photo albums and see yourself as a youngster riding your bike or opening presents on Christmas morning, the faces don't necessarily look like the face that you see staring back at you in the mirror, but you know it's you in all those images, as different as you may appear. Does the self you remember as a child or a young adult feel like you? Or when you think back to that person, do they seem more like a stranger? Do you seem to be remembering the you of yesterday? Or on the other hand, when you look at old photos or think back to experiences from years ago, does it feel more like you're reading a novel about some fictional other character? It's been said that if you have the feeling that it's been the same you all along, as I do, you're probably what's been referred to by at least one author as a continuer, the continuum of your life. If, on the other hand, you look back to the old you and it seems like an entirely different person, almost a stranger to you now, then you may be what's been referred to as a divider. Your life is divided into episodic segments. In his autobiographical novel called My Struggle, author Karl Ove Knausgaard, a middle-aged man striving to be better today than he was as a young man, questioned whether it made sense for him to even use his same name over his lifetime of changes. Looking at a photograph of himself as an infant, he wondered what that little person had to do with the middle-aged father and writer he became, and with the elderly man he will become. It might be better, he suggests, to adopt a series of names, one for himself as a baby, one reflecting his younger self, his adult self, and so on throughout his life. And another author and professor of psychology by the name of Susan Blackmore, well, she argues that there's no continuity between our present selves and our past selves. She says there's simply an illusion of continuity. But what we think is us is just a multiple parallel system, she says, with multiple things going on. She says the so-called me now is just another reconstruction. That is, there was one version of me a half hour ago, there'll be another version of me along the way, but they're not really the same person. They're just, as she says, dust happening in the universe. Both interesting concepts, but those theories may be a bit drastic for most of us who are content with simply thinking in terms of the younger me and the older me. By the way, many research studies suggest that as we grow older, Most of us become more conscientious and agreeable and less neurotic. Research has shown that we develop into more altruistic, giving, and trusting individuals as we age. Our willpower increases, and we develop a better sense of humor. So much for the notion of grumpy old men and women. Psychologists call that process, as we age, personality maturation, maturing. It's a gradual, imperceptible change that begins in our teenage years and continues throughout our lives. It also seems to be universal, that is, across all human cultures around the world. It may be that as we grow older, we're forced to change our behavior and over time to become more responsible. So it seems that our personalities change to help us cope with life's challenges. So looking back, what about looking ahead, regardless of how old we may be? When we remember our past selves, we may seem quite different. But a team of psychologists who conducted a study of almost 20,000 people found that when we look ahead, we sometimes expect ourselves not to change, but to stay the same as we are now. Participants in the study were asked about their personality traits and preferences, including their favorite foods, vacations, hobbies, bands even, and in years past and present. And then they were asked to make predictions for their future. Not surprisingly, the younger people in the study reported more change in the previous decade than did the older respondents. But when asked to predict what their personalities and tastes would be like in, say, 10 years going forward, people of all ages consistently played down the potential changes ahead. They thought their self now will be very similar to their self in the future. The researchers found that the older people were, the less they saw themselves as changing in the future, regardless of their age. It seemed that people tended to be better at recalling their former selves than at imagining how much they would change in the future. Why? Well, the researchers offered a few theories, beginning with the well-documented tendency of people to overestimate their own wonderfulness. Believing that we just reached the peak of our personal evolution makes us feel good, the researchers said. The other theory is that it's simply more difficult to imagine the future than it is to remember the past. And by the way, to answer the question of whether you're the same person you used to be, well, from a physical perspective, sad to say, you're a little bit less than you were before. You see, on average, we shrink about 1/4 to 1/3 of an inch every decade after the age of 40. All told, men will become about 1.2 to 1.5 inches shorter after they reach age 40, and women will lose up to 2 inches by age 70. But if it's any consolation, and as your mother may have told you, sit up straight, it seems that maintaining a good posture keeps your bones healthy and keeps stress off your vertebrae, and you may just maintain a bit more of your height. I'm Jay Elias. Thank you for watching this episode of Live and Learn. I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to your joining me again for another program designed to enhance and encourage your personal wellness and awareness. Until then, remember, it's never too late to learn. And in closing, I'd like to leave you with the amusing words of an actress, Estelle Getty of all people, best known for her role as Sophia in the Golden Girls television series. She's quoted as saying this: "People assume that I'm wiser than I am because I'm somewhat successful. Age does not bring you wisdom. Age brings you wrinkles. If you're dumb when you're young, you're going to be dumb when you're old."